You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
من هناك لشوارزنيجر
Ya lo hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, 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 golazo.
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Dwayne Rollins and Kevin Laramie. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
3 countries, 1 podcast. I'm Dwayne Rollins, Soccer Today. Kevin Laramie joins me as always in Mexico today. We have Tom Marshall to talk about the Mexican side of this World Cup bid. Jonathan Tannenwald, he's in the United States. He's going to talk about it there too. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me on and for the invitation. And yeah, look forward to the debate.
Yeah, there we go. Jonathan, everything good down in Philadelphia today? Jonathan,
I'm a little fired up, so your folks are warned.
All right, and Kevin and I, we talk all the time, so I'll just let this fly. All right, so basically the World Cup bid that wasn't really that surprising comes out yesterday. We learned a little bit of the details. So Jonathan says he's fired up. So let's just start there. Why don't you just give us an overview on why you're fired up?
I'm fired up because I got a lot of readers who are fired up, but I'm also fired up because if we are honest, fellas, the World Cup's coming to North America in 2026. I really can't see any other bid knocking this one off. I mean, we're already hearing the stories about how they're trying to speed up the vote for the bid to 2018 so that they can really get going on it. I can't see anybody knocking this thing off. I think there's going to be, there's going to be World Cup games in Mexico City and Guadalajara and Monterrey. Dwayne and Kevin, I think there's going to be World Cup games in Vancouver, and I think there might be in Toronto. And for me, I think there's going to be World Cup games in Philadelphia. The question is, where else? We got a lot to talk about, I think, in that regard.
Fair enough. And Tom, well, what is the reaction today in Mexico with this announcement?
It's been strange. I mean, there's been quite a lot of criticism about how the bid's been presented, and basically the main issue is Mexico's only going to get 10 games, and then no games from the quarterfinal stage onwards. So I think people in Mexico, I think the thing is, if 1 month ago or even 2 weeks ago, people would have had the understanding in Mexico that basically Mexico's a junior partner, a complete junior partner in this agreement, I think people would have accepted it. But the thing is, going into yesterday's historic press conference to announce the bid, I think a lot of people in Mexico thought Mexico would be not an equal partner. I don't think anybody was legitimately thinking that. But I think people were thinking that Mexico were going to have a major role to play in this World Cup. And then now I think you're seeing big figures in the Mexican game coming out. Hugo Sanchez this morning saying that, Mexico have kind of... they've lost a dignity with this. They've accepted basically the United States throwing a few tips the way, and Mexico's going to get no sporting benefits from it. There's been a lot of figures that have come out and said similar things. I think this really hurts kind of Mexican nationalistic pride in the fact that Mexico's held 2 of the greatest World Cups ever, and then all of a sudden going to 2026, and now Mexico's going to play a few group games, and I think that people are not happy because, going back to what I said before, if you go before, I think people are expecting a lot more, and I think that's why the reaction has been as it has been here in Mexico.
Tom, I don't blame him, but Decio Di Maria signed this thing.
Decio Di Maria is an economist, a politician. He actually was part of the negotiations for the NAFTA. And yeah, I know he signed it. The federation has signed it. You can see the benefits for the federation. The other argument today from the federation, from both Di Maria and Guillermo Cantú, is that with games surely going to be played in Los Angeles, Phoenix, Houston, Dallas, Chicago, these are basically Mexican home games anyway. These are where Mexican national team play, sell out huge NFL stadiums anyway. So, aside from the games in Mexico, those cities in the United States kind of represent home cities for the Mexican national team. But yeah, he did sign it, but I don't think he's kind of representing Mexico as a whole. It's just not been a really positive reaction, which is strange when you think that 2 days ago there was no guarantee of any World Cup, and then today there's 10 games in Mexico.
Well, Tom, I'm going to bring Tom back in, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the Mexican side of this, because I am confused as well that Mexico would agree with that, with the history that they have in the game. But I want to bring Kevin on board right now. Kevin, the reaction up here is similar to Mexico, at least from my initial sort of viewing of the situation. Is that your perspective as well, that
Yes.
most Canadians are frustrated by this too?
Yes. Well, we kind of expected it. That's the difference. Being Canada and being the soccer world, we kind of expected being the third wheel, but we'd be just glad to be there. So I was expecting it. But in my mind, and like I talked yesterday, I had an idea. We know it's going to be 48 teams, and I figured, well, 24 in the States, 12 in Mexico, 12 in Canada, group stage, two groups, 6, and eventually it goes to knockout stage in US. That's fine. But that was like my idea, and I thought that was a little more fair. But no, it turns out it's just a few games here and there, and the majority of the games will be in the States. Yes, there's political reasons. There's international affairs reason why the bid needs to be joined to be fully viewed and accepted by FIFA. But it is interesting to me that fans in Canada did expect the bid to be like this, but are still just happy to be there. We're a good Canadian, Dwayne. We're happy to be included.
Okay, so I got a question for you. I could see it being 50-15 and 15 instead of 60-10 and 10. But I can't see it being any fewer than that in the United States, because it's clear that the U.S. is going to carry a lot of the freight financially on this thing.
Okay, well, what about 50-20, 10?
Well,
20
that's my
for
next
Mexico.
question. If Mexico and Canada don't have the same number of games, is that better or worse? Dwayne?
I think my frustration lies from the fact that I believe this country has the resources to pull it off by themselves anyway, but we just lack the ambition often in a lot of things, and this sort of underlines that this coming out like this. I mean, originally there was supposed to be a Canadian only bid. They've obviously decided to take the sure thing, as you said, Jonathan, and I do agree that this is very likely to be the bid that will win the day, and that there won't be much resistance to it around the world. I believe that it had to be equal between Mexico and Canada for political reasons in this country, that if we were truly a third party in this, that would be something that would be viewed particularly poorly. But again, I come down, I'm confused on why both of these federations would agree with this. It essentially feels to me that this is a U.S. World Cup bid, and Canada and Mexico are along for the ride and going to get a few
I know why
crosses.
Canada agreed to it. There's no doubt in my mind why Canada agreed to it.
Well, why don't you tell us then?
They just qualified for the 2026 World Cup.
Woohoo!
Fair enough.
And if they don't qualify for 2022, it's their first one since '86, right?
Correct, yes.
So Victor Montagliani, the president of CONCACAF, who we know, certainly a lot of us in the U.S. believe, has been trying to do as much for Canadian soccer as he can as the head of CONCACAF, just did the biggest thing he could. He put Canada in the Men's World Cup.
I'd rather qualify my own, but yes, I get that.
So now here's my question about Canada's portion of this thing. And it's a question that I've raised to you guys many times over the years. Given that the minimum capacity for these things has to be 40 grand, right?
Yeah.
So right now there's only 4 venues in Canada over 40 grand. You could expand, I'm sure, Regina, Winnipeg, Calgary, maybe BMO Field. I don't know. Maybe Ottawa, but there's not a lot of land there to do it with. Maybe Hamilton. So assuming for the purposes of 2026 that Edmonton is out because it's too far and the stadium's big enough, but infrastructure-wise, the rest of the city isn't quite going to compute. Vancouver is the biggest lock of all. We know that. The Rogers Centre in Toronto, we can, I think, assume is a lock. They'll have grass down by then, right?
That's up in the air yet, because they've looked into a lot of ways to try and do that effectively. And as of right now, they don't believe the technology is going to allow it to effectively grow there. I think it's more likely that BMO Field will be expanded.
So tell that to the Argonauts.
Well,
That's for another show.
Argonauts might not be around by then, but we'll leave that well enough alone.
So here's the question. Here is to me the question. Assuming that Toronto and Vancouver are the two Canadian cities that could host all 10 games if they had to, Kevin, is Montreal going to be in play in this? And the reason why I ask is the following. And it's a question that I've asked on this show many times before, as your listeners know. Will the taxpayers of Quebec put the money down for a new Olympic stadium, and how much?
Well, Jonathan,
Can I throw a little more context out there first for the American listeners who have been in on the conversation before? You mind?
No, go ahead.
Let's assume that Pierre-Carl Pelletot and Quebecor, who paid the money for the hockey arena in Quebec City, won't foot the bill for a new Olympic stadium because Bell has the World Cup rights and Quebecor's TV network, TVA Sport, won't have any of the games. I would bet that Bell won't foot the bill because there aren't going to be enough events in this stadium after the World Cup unless the Alouettes move there. Then add to that the potential of a privately financed baseball stadium coming to Montreal for the return of the Expos, which I assume Bell would have the rights to. I don't know if there would be the appetite for another privately financed stadium across town. So who else is going to pay for it?
Maybe that stadium will be one and the same. That's a stroke of genius that I had yesterday. How about a new baseball / new soccer stadium for the Impact, closer downtown, bigger, and FIFA standards? But the mayor of Montreal, Denis Coderre, mentioned yesterday after this press conference that Montreal is all in and will make sure they are involved in the FIFA World Cup 2026 discussion to be one of those cities in Canada that do host one of those 10 games. Montreal will definitely be in the discussion. That was part of Mayor Denis Coderre's address yesterday. And Denis Coderre has a track record of being very involved in the sports world. Sometimes it's for the right or wrong reason. He is very in the same direction of the new Expos. He really wants the new Expos to come basically. So he wants Tampa Bay to come to Montreal. But there's the talk of new stadium. There's talk of maybe now with this announcement and the future of the Montreal Impact, where eventually in the future they'll need a bigger stadium if things stay the course. We're talking about the 5-10 years down the road, but that's the timeline of the 2026 World Cup. So maybe a new bigger stadium downtown somewhere, big enough and made in a way that you can transform adequately from football, soccer to baseball, even maybe soccer. So maybe a multi-purpose stadium could be beneficial for the entire city. But the mayor of Montreal yesterday, regardless, said Montreal would be involved in the discussion. And the Olympic Stadium, by the way, the old one is having a big renovation over the last year, ended up coming next year, so it might be up to FIFA standard by 2026 as well. So Montreal, according to the mayor Denis Coderre, will be in the discussion for the games for 2026.
Okay, Dwayne, I got a question for you.
Sure.
How much will the taxpayers of Ontario have to put up for either renovations to the Rogers Centre, an expansion to BMO Field, or an entirely new stadium if the NFL ever comes back into the conversation?
Yeah.
Assuming Rogers won't foot the bill because Bell has World Cup rights, and Bell won't foot the bill for the Rogers Centre because Rogers owns the Blue Jays.
You did mention the sort of the grill in the room there with the NFL, which has been a long-standing conversation in this city to try and build a stadium that would accommodate that. There's some land down on the sort of eastern lake that might make sense and has been sort of earmarked quietly for that kind of project for a long time. So that is a possibility as well. But if you're only talking about a group stage game here, if Canada's in the mix for even a semifinal or a quarterfinal, even maybe I could see them going that route. I think that what you're going to see with this bid is like I said, expansion of existing facilities. I think because of the turf grass debate, and maybe we'll touch on that in a second, that it's going to have, it's going to have to be the grass facilities, which limits this greatly. Alas, in terms of the appetite for a big public expenditure for a stadium, it like most places in the world, in the United States, certainly right now is almost non-existent. It would have to be privately funded. And as you mentioned, there's lots of complications there. And even if they did build an NFL-sized stadium, I have a hard time believing the NFL is coming to Toronto anytime soon. So there's that.
I want to quickly add
I think we will see grass put down at BC Place and potentially at the Rogers Centre. As many friends of mine pointed out to me yesterday, They put grass down in the Pontiac Silverdome in Detroit in 1994 for an event this big. They'll make it work. Now, I said for an event this big, Dwayne, let's just get it over with, shall we?
Mm.
I'm going to read you something that you wrote for
Oh,
Equalizer
okay.
Soccer, July 11th, 2013.
You have
There is
bookmark?
no way that a men's World Cup would be played on turf at this time. The Canadian men refused to even play qualifiers on turf, and the CSA accommodated them by playing all 6 home games at BMO Field. Yet they are making the women play a World Cup on it. By the time 2026 rolls around, CONCACAF will be way overdue, and Canada is the only realistic choice in the region among countries that haven't hosted before. Canada would have to build stadiums if it were to host the men. The country has the money, but for the political will to be there, they would need to find a way to ensure they aren't white elephants following the tournament. The way to do that is to tie them into Canadian or possibly American football stadiums. Gridiron is played on turf. Thus, the CSA wants to prove to FIFA that a senior World Cup can be successfully hosted on turf. In essence, the women are being used as guinea pigs. Now, a few of us down here have not forgotten that. And so Peter Nolan of GotSoccer.com asked Victor Montagliani yesterday whether this men's World Cup would be played on grass in Canada. And Victor Montagliani said, when we bid for the Women's World Cup, our actual bid didn't really stipulate any surface. I have some reason to disbelieve that. But after we actually got the bid, FIFA made the decision that they wanted to go with artificial turf, or two-star turf, as they called it. We then actually changed a couple of fields to meet that. Dwayne, Kevin, perhaps you might know which ones.
Moncton.
Any others?
No, Moncton was grass before they ripped the grass out and put turf in.
All right. So one, but not a couple. We invested in training facilities and all that. So the decision was made by FIFA. Victor Montagliani said, getting himself out of the picture as best he could. We haven't discussed any of that here, but I'm sure that's FIFA's decision. And whatever the surface is going to be, I think each country will respond to that part of the bid accordingly. Obviously, every men's World Cup has been on grass. I would assume this would be the same. Wayne.
Yes.
Is that hypocrisy that I smell?
It's politics you're smelling, at least. We'll say that. I don't believe. Sorry, say that again, Jonathan.
It's not a pleasant smell either way.
Okay, fair enough. That 13 article there was, by the way, the first person to write that the games are on turf. I don't know how it took so long for everyone else to learn that, but at any rate, look, yeah, this is difficult for me to accept that they're just so flippantly going to brush past this because of the controversy that did swirl around the Women's World Cup, which I think it turned out all right for all involved, including the United States, that World Cup down the line, but nonetheless. It certainly is a question, and the lack of facilities up here probably, that is a reason why we're only going to get 10 games in Canada, because of the lack of grass facilities. And if that is their intention, then that's their intention. It's possible that they did, in fact, jointly, FIFA and the CSA, decide to host that World Cup on turf to try and prove something, and then they found that it was more of a pain than it was worth, and now they're going back to the default that they've always been to.
Tom, I have a question for Tom before we
Sure.
let Tom go. Tom has something he needs to get going soon. Tom, when you're looking at the infrastructures in Mexico as a whole, in Mexico City and Guadalajara, what is your expectations for this 2026 World Cup bid? What could it bring for the infrastructures? We know that right now Azteca is undergoing great renovations, but what do you expect for the infrastructures of Mexican football with this bid?
And Monterrey, while you're at it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, I think this is another reason for disappointment. I think when you get something like the World Cup, you almost want to see investment in infrastructure. You want to see kind of, maybe a new stadium, not saying go crazy like South Africa and build loads of new stadiums, but I think with Mexico only having 10 games, the rumor is that Mexico will be going for 4 venues. So obviously Guadalajara, the Chivas Stadium was opened in 2010. I think that could hold a World Cup pretty comfortably right now. The new stadium in Monterrey, that could the same pretty comfortably hold a World Cup. And then obviously the Aztecas undergone the renovation. Those are finished now because they finished just before the NFL game that was played down there, I believe, in November. So yeah, you've got 3 stadiums just right there. I mean, ready to go. Teams are playing week in, week out on them in those stadiums. And then you got to find one more. Now, Mexico has a lot of stadiums. It could be a case of doing renovations on another stadium. I think the other issue, and I think one of the complications with Mexico's role in the World Cup 2026 bid is the altitude, specifically Mexico City. Monterrey is actually pretty much the same altitude as the rest of Texas. And Guadalajara is not ridiculous either. But Mexico City, if you've got group games in Mexico City, I feel like you're going to have to, the teams in that group, the 3 teams in that group will have to be based in that area. Why? Because so they can climatize before. So I think there's going to be another stadium in Mexico City or close to Mexico City. So obviously you've got Ciudad Universitaria, which was the '68 Olympic Stadium used in both World Cups as well. And that, or you could go outside to a city like Puebla, which I think that's what's going to happen. I think those are going to be the 4 options that Mexico use. But I am slightly disappointed that say I would have if before knowing the details of the bid, I was thinking Tijuana would be a great place to to host a World Cup, to have a group. See San Diego on one side of the border, Tijuana on the other, and have it a kind of a real strong message that this is definitely a World Cup that goes across borders. But I just can't see that happening now with somewhere like Tijuana. And I think Gulati yesterday was talking about Guadalajara, Los Angeles, even Santa Clara. That kind of being part of the same kind of Western Seaboard. So I can see that happening, kind of the California venues being included with Guadalajara, and then Monterrey with kind of a couple of cities or a city in Texas, and then Mexico City having its own kind of group.
All right, Tom has to go, so we'll say goodbye to him right this. But real quickly before you do go, Tom, do you share Jonathan's view that this is close to a slam dunk as CONCACAF winning this bid?
Yeah, I mean, you just look at what FIFA have said. You look at the outlines, the nations that could possibly promote a bid themselves. And no, it ticks all the boxes, this bid. I think that and especially with Mexico and Canada in there as well, it does remove that kind of the political talk, that one issue. I think that people, not necessarily in North America, but outside of North America, when it came to the World Cup, specifically with Trump and the travel bans and stuff like that, I think people would have really focused on that even more if it would have been just the United States compared to now. It's like the conversation's kind of shifted already towards how is this going to work between the 3 countries? And I think it's been pretty smart from US Soccer and CONCACAF, to be honest.
All right, Tom, we'll say goodbye. You can read his work at ESPN. Of course, thanks for your time today, and we'll maybe talk down the road. We'll keep Jonathan on the line to finish the discussion, though. And Jonathan, what will derail this bid?
Africa, some candidature from Africa. But I think that Sunil Gulati and Victor Montagliani and Decio Di Maria will come back at this and say it is entirely possible that they're not going to have to build even one stadium, maybe one stadium at most for this tournament. And honestly, I think that one stadium at most would be in Montreal if they have to do something to the baseball stadium to make it work for this, or build a new Olympic stadium. That's it. And I think that's going to win over a lot of people. I hope it's going to win over a lot of people, because we talk all the time about how much these stadiums are wasted.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've been happily surprised by the political response yesterday, at least at the municipal level, Denis Coderre and his involvement in what could be a new game or a few games of the World Cup in Montreal, and what this can bring infrastructure-wise to the city and the needs that this city has and are going to have for 2026.
But I could also see it. I don't think the baseball stadium is going to work. And I don't think building a stadium would then get downsized to like 30,000 people.
Yeah.
For the impact. It's going to end up being all that feasible. Maybe it is, if the impact really grow a lot over the next 5 to 6 years. But I don't see it. Now, granted, I think Stade Saputo works really well for them. I know there are some people who don't like the location because they won't cross St. Lawrence Boulevard. but it's so easy to get to on the subway. And it's surrounded by a lot of other things that everybody in town knows about. I think it's fine. And they've certainly proven with the number of games they've sold out in that stadium that it's working fine for them.
And there's a lot of renovations, by the way, that have taken place that will be that were unveiled yesterday. It's a good segue. It's easier now to streamline inside the stadiums, more vendors, more bathrooms. All the $3 million were invested in Satsupusho this offseason, but it's still going to be too small. You would need to even like to double it, and that's almost structurally speaking, like in architect terms, it's not feasible. You would have to change the entire structure, change the entire stadium, basically. So you would have to basically start anew somewhere else to make it more easier. So there's that question. But Jonathan, when you're looking at the 60 games in the States, big cities, there's a lot, there's plenty. How would it work? How would you make every city that wants a game not feel left out? Because of course it's going to happen.
Right. It's going to happen at a point, but there's so many more games in this tournament there have ever been before, that every stadium of big enough size that wants some will get their fill, and it will help them cluster groups geographically so that it will cut down on the travel time and not so many teams will have to be traveling coast to coast. I imagine that the U.S. will. I imagine that Canada will. You know that Canada is going to play one group stage game in Toronto and one in Vancouver. Maybe one in Toronto and one in Montreal, and then a knockout round game in Vancouver. Maybe. But, they're going to hit them all. And the U.S. is going to hit both coasts. I would think, I would not be surprised if the U.S. gets grouped on, either going to get grouped on the West Coast and play knockout route games in the East, which would put them potentially in Philly on July 4th, 2026. I've been saying for years, I want the U.S. England in a round of 16 or quarterfinal game on the 250th anniversary of American independence in the city where America was born.
Wow. Who wrote this?
So, but other than that, you're going to have groups that are in LA, San Jose, and Guadalajara. You're going to have groups that are in, San Jose, Seattle, and Vancouver. You're going to have groups that are in Chicago, Indianapolis, maybe Kansas City. You're going to have groups in Miami, Atlanta, and Washington, maybe somewhere else in the South. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's not going to be that difficult. Maybe Miami, Atlanta, and Houston, because Houston's not all that far from New Orleans. It's going to work, and it's going to be fine in that regard, I think. Now, you asked what could shoot it down. To me, the only thing that could shoot it down is anti-American sentiment. And obviously, the three-nation bid neuters that to no small degree. And I will let of all people, Victor Montagliani make the case. He said, North America is lucky in that North America owes the world a lot. North America is populated by all parts of the world. Europeans, Africans, Asians, Oceania, as we call it in our world. You also have three guys here who are sons of immigrants. Sunil, as we know, his family's from India. Desio Di Maria, a Paisano as well, Italiano. I can't do it the same way Victor does so easily, but that's my own fault, not his. And I'm the son of an Italian immigrant. Nothing illustrates more what football brings to this world than, I think, our three backgrounds. That us three are standing here as the presidents of federations of the countries that took in our families is a very powerful statement and something that I'm very proud of. And Sunil Gulati, the president of the U.S. Soccer Federation, who, in case folks didn't figure it out yesterday, is no fan of Donald Trump. He has implied it many ways, many ways, because he can't say it publicly. He's the head of a nonprofit that's a sport governing body in a country that's a big tent, and he wants his game to be a big tent. Sometimes, yes, when you make the tent big, you want Hispanics and Asians and African Americans and everybody, and you might even want to have some conservatives in the tent too, if you want the tent to be really big. So, Sunil Gulati, first of all, U.S. Soccer went to the White House, and by whatever means, I don't know, but they got President Trump to say he's happy with this. And they got President Trump to say something that allowed Sunil Gulati to then say that Trump, quote, is especially pleased that Mexico is part of this bid. So he got what he needed. He got the political cover that he needed to both assuage people and say, okay, look, we're going to make this work. So, Sunil Gulati said, we think in the interesting world in which we live, and he said this with this look in his eye, that he was implying some things. And if you know Sunil Gulati, he can sometimes come across as being the smartest guy in the room. And sometimes he is the smartest guy in the room, to be fair. But he has this look in his eye when he said that. You knew what he was what he was referring to. And the place we're holding this press conference and the Statue of Liberty outside and a whole bunch of things along those lines, from a social perspective, it's a positive. We don't believe that sport can solve all of the issues of the world, but especially what's going on in the world today. We think this is a hugely positive signal and symbol of what we can do together in unifying people, especially in our three countries. And then he said rather snidely, regarding anything else that may have been said during the campaign or after the fact, I'm not going to speak for the president on those. Mr. Spicer gets to do that every day, referring to Sean Spicer, the press secretary for the White House. What on earth do y'all think he was referring to?
Well, I suspect it would be something to do with policies regarding immigration and so forth. Jonathan, to move it off the political front, and we do agree. I think that Trump is the Trump, I guess, in this bid. But you could always just roll out Justin Trudeau shirtless and probably
not unless either he throws out the Constitution and his party claims to love the Constitution, or he loses in 2021, runs again, and wins another 4-year term, which I think would be absurd. But the odds of he's not going to be president in 2026. Okay.
No,
everybody there's people around the world who think that he's going to be president in 2026.
Yeah, we never know.
You have to change the Constitution to do that. I believe,
right.
Yeah.
Assuming that he can't get away with that.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, true.
Funny times.
For as quickly as he has moved to try to do all this stuff, you don't think that they could throw it out fairly quickly to come on, folks. Yeah. And by the way, I wanted to mention this too, and then we can move on. Is American soccer too white? Yes. Are there people that you and I know who sort of like to imply every once in a while on social media that American soccer being too white sort of puts it in the Trump column, and that other things are sort of rebelling against that, including Mexican soccer?
Sure.
Yes, they do. There's a lot of us out there who have a lot of things we'd like to say and can't. And the reason why we can't is that we'd be risking our livelihoods in ways that other people don't have to worry about. And if your listeners are out there wondering why some of us haven't really shot our mouths off and said what we feel about the political climate of the country right now, it's because we're going to get fired if we do.
There you go.
So don't assume, just as you can't assume that when a Democrat's in the White House, everybody in the country is Democrat, you can't assume that when a Republican's in the White House, everybody's a Republican. And look, the left lost badly last November. Not just the presidency, the House, the Senate, state houses, governorships, all of it. Lost, clearly. Even though Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. On the whole, the thing was pretty decisive. But there's still a lot of people, and I will say I know Sunil Gulati enough to believe that Sunil Gulati is one of them, who are working pretty darn hard to project a different image of America to the best that they are able. That doesn't mean it's all going to be perfect. But there are a lot of people who are out there trying. And just because not all of us can go shouting from the rooftops all the time doesn't mean that people aren't trying.
Yeah. John, yeah.
Fair enough. Jonathan or Kevin, jump in on this one real quick. Moving sort of in a different direction with this multi-country bid. You see the Euros, the next Euros coming are going to have multiple hosts as well. Is this the future of these big events? Have they become so big that you need to spread them across multiple countries?
I believe so. If you're looking at, why was events like this held in one place to begin with? Since the beginning of those events, because travel wasn't easy back then, so it was easier to get everybody together at the same geographical place and then move from there. Now it's not the same. It's possible to have a few pods of groups here and there and eventually meet up at the right place at the right time to cuts down the cost, to spread it out a bit more, and it makes more sense that way financially. It makes more sense too of the imprint, the benefit of that World Cup. If it touches more people, maybe it benefits the game at a better rate, at a better scale, quicker. Maybe that's the idea. And it brings me to this question I'll ask Jonathan and Dwayne as well. Jonathan, in 1994, the World Cup, still to this day the most watched World Cup ever, laid the groundwork to create MLS. And 20 years down the road now, we have a thriving league that's becoming the talk of the town in the world of soccer broadly. What will a 2026 World Cup for Canada, but especially for the United States, mean? Where would it bring that game? Where would it raise the level of the game even more?
Sure. And I think it would bring obviously a lot more, commercial sponsorship and investment into the game in both countries, the U.S. and Canada. I think for the U.S. it will be more of a capstone than a launch point. I mean, not a finishing product, obviously, because that won't happen until the U.S. wins a World Cup, which I don't think they're going to do in 26 or 22 or 18 or probably 30 or for some time to come. They need like 1,000 more Christian Pulisic's, not just 5. So, but I would note this too, and y'all probably knew I was going to do this to you. This isn't the launching thing for the CPL. CPL had other reasons why it was getting off the ground. You'd like to think that by 2026, the CPL will have been on solid footing for some time. And MLS will be on even more solid footing. And from there, who knows what. But
the knock that you heard is Dwayne knocking on wood.
The CPL was coming before this World Cup bid was coming.
Yeah, and the knock that you heard during the Jonathan is Dwayne knocking on wood on the other side.
Yeah, there you go.
You mean it's not quite settled yet, Dwayne? Is that possible? I thought it was a certainty.
No, it is a certainty that's going to happen. Is it a certainty that's going to last to 2026 is the question, because that is the $1 million question that it always has. There's some, speaking of which, real quickly, Anthony Totaro last night reported that they would be announcing it following the May board meeting, which is the 12th of May. So there's your date, folks. And that's Anthony reporting that, because I've reported dates that didn't work out before. I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. Yeah, in terms of, I'll answer my own question in terms of the multiple city bids and the legacy and things like that. I do think it's clear that these things have become so big now that you do need to kind of spread the wealth out. It's just kind of disappointing from a Canadian perspective that so few games will be here. I think that we pretty much know where they're going to be. You look at the math, and it looks like you could have 3 groups up here of those 3-team groups, and you could put 1 in Montreal, 1 in Toronto, 1 in Vancouver, and then there'd be around a 16 game somewhere. Maybe Vancouver, depends on what kind of stadium situation there would be here in the biggest center in the country. In terms of the legacy up here, there is some positive feelings amongst some today that this is something that can really be used to launch the game forward. I have trouble believing that 10 games will do that, but it is such a massive event, it's such a massive sort of symbolic thing to have the World Cup here. But as Jonathan said a while ago, probably the most important thing, and probably the reason that they're most doing this, was to get Canada in the World Cup. The only question I have is whether they would be granted 3 full host spots, or whether there might be some resistance to that.
Yes.
Do you believe so? I mean, Mexico and the U.S., especially with an expanded World Cup, they don't really need to worry about it anyway. So really, we're talking about Canada when we have this. So you don't think there's any?
Yes.
Okay.
Victor and Sunil have far too much power within FIFA to stop that from happening, and CONCACAF, obviously.
Yeah, 48 spots.
I think what is more likely to me is that Toronto and Montreal are part of that Eastern Seaboard cluster, or maybe Toronto is in a Chicago-Detroit cluster, and Vancouver is in a Seattle, San Jose, LA cluster.
Portland, yeah.
Not Portland. They're not going to have a stadium that's big enough for this.
Okay, fine.
But to me, what I think it's going to show, and I think this has been necessary for a long time, it's going to do what the 3 of us have been hoping would be done to the Olympics for a long time, and they still haven't done it yet, which is there's only so many places that can host these things anymore. All right?
Yeah.
That's the idea, I hope, that comes out of this. And is it going to, look, is China obviously going to build, 60 stadiums, 1 million miles of rail track, and whatever else they have. Of course they are. But if it means that Brazil doesn't have to have all these white elephants anymore, or Argentina and Uruguay in 2030, because that's coming down the pike. Or
Precise.
name your country in Africa that ought to be spending money on things other than this. Let's hope that that's part of what comes out of this.
Well, and Kevin and I have talked about that very idea for the Olympics on multiple 5 ring shows. It's become like a part of our bingo card there. It makes so much sense, but there's obviously some political and probably financial reasons why they try and keep them in one place. Jonathan, let's end with this. The final, obviously, is going to be the gold star there. It's really early to try and predict this because you don't know what the state of these stadiums are going to be. They may build something new, you're right. But where, if you had to guess right now, do you feel that the final will be held?
If I had to really put money on it, I'd say MetLife Stadium in New York, or northern New Jersey, across the river from New York, because you can play it at 4 o'clock Eastern time, which is reasonably late in the day that you're not quite in the worst of the hot sun. 4 o'clock in the East is 9 o'clock in London, 10 o'clock in Central Europe. We all know this is going to be done for European television purposes. It always is. You got Phoenix, Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, possibly Los. I don't know if the new stadium in LA is going to have a roof on it or not. Miami's got half a roof on it. You know, they're going to play games where they can during the afternoons for European television. We know this. They're going to play some games at night in Philadelphia, New York, Miami for the audience in the Americas and for the audience in Asia. We know that. But the big ones are going to be in the afternoon, hours in North America. So my guess is MetLife Stadium because LA hosted 94. And I was thinking about this earlier. I was writing it down when Tom was talking about what the Mexican venues are going to be. If they go to, I wouldn't be surprised if they go to 4, but as he noted, they're going to have to do something either in Puebla or renovate the stadium that Unam Pumas plays in where they had the Olympics in 68. Consider the possibility of Mexico going from Azteca for what will probably be the tournament opening game to Guadalajara for the second group stage game, Monterrey for the round of 32, because I bet you there's going to be a round of 32. They're going to take 2 teams out of each group. That sound about right?
Yeah, I believe actually that was what I'd heard floated, so yes.
Okay, so Monterrey for the round of 32, Phoenix for the round of 16, Houston for the Houston for the 8s, Dallas for the semifinals, and then LA or New York for the championship game. Potentially even LA. It could be LA in that sense because then Mexico wouldn't even have to go to New York. Yeah. But there's going to be a new NFL stadium in LA. There's going to be a lot of pressure to put it there. There's going to be MetLife Stadium in New York. There's going to be a lot of pressure to put it there. It's one of those two. I wouldn't be surprised if it's New York this time around.
You don't think the Texas stadiums would have a chance to host a final, or is that they just want to go to the biggest centers?
I think you just want to hit it as big as possibly can in terms of market.
And not just that, in 2026, the Dallas Stadium would have been over 10 years old now and would have lost a little bit of that luster that still has now.
Well, the MetLife Stadium will be plenty old too, but but it's as big as Jerry World is.
Yeah,
there aren't that many people who actually like it.
And it's not necessarily the best place, and to get there, the infrastructures outside of the actual stadium, it could be interesting when you talk about not just to drive there, but the hotels and stuff like that would accommodate the World Cup parties. Yeah.
You want LA because it's LA or New York because it's New York. I think those are the two choices. And I think, by the way, you'll see one round of 32 game, maybe more in Canada, and one round of 16 game in Canada.
Hopefully. Hopefully. There's going to be a lot of time to sort of work out the details for this, of course. 45 minutes into this, I think we will say goodbye to it today. Jonathan, as always, Philadelphia Inquirer, of course, is where you can read Jonathan's work. Anything you want to promote before you say goodbye?
Oh, boy. No, because the soccer team in this town is dreadful right now. Right now, I'm a completely other subject is what I'm focusing on right now, which is waiting for the National Women's Soccer League's online streaming deal. They haven't announced it yet. I'm getting kind of sick of waiting for them.
Not even a week's away. Not even a week away, and we still don't have any
That's right.
news on that. Yeah.
All right, Jonathan, we'll have you back to talk about that and more later on. But as always, we thank you for your time. We'll say goodbye now. Kevin, I'll come back. We'll really quickly sort of set up the Champions League games today and maybe take a little bit of a look back.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS post-game show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome back.
That was fun.
Yeah, no, we could do that. We could have, we all love Jonathan. We probably could have gone 3 hours on that if we wanted to, but nonetheless, we'll move on from now. But real quickly, we never really asked you directly. Do you believe that it's a sure thing that this will win?
Oh yeah, it has to be. If you're looking at the last time the region had a World Cup in 1994, if you're looking at the center of attention that North America has become in the world with technology, with social media and everything surrounding what a World Cup in North America and Canada, United States, and Mexico could be in 2026. You're talking about the biggest World Cup ever for all the reason, the 215th anniversary, like Jonathan mentioned, of the American Constitution, and the great narrative that could become the Canada's first World Cup participation in 30 years, and a lot of Mexico 30-year anniversary of the last time they held the World Cup. You can have it at Azteca. It'd be a great day. It's a great accomplishment. All those things just makes a lot of sense, and it's their time. Let's not forget, Europe and Asia won't be able to bid for this World Cup because they were Russia in 18 and Qatar in 22, because they're already hosting the World Cup in the 2 previous cycles, so they're not allowed to bid. So it's going to be between Oceania, Africa, and CONCACAF. And the way it is going right now, I don't think there's any bid that could potentially rival this 3-country bid, because, well, the caveat of the international political aspect right now is kind of diluted because of the 3 nations and the inclusivity that this joint bid does promote. So I know there's a lot of good things with this bid that basically makes it a sure shot, I think.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with all that. And then you factor in, like you said, South America is not going to bid because they want the Centennial game or the Centennial World Cup, right? So,
Yes.
So that's all played in there too. Look, I'm having trouble today getting too excited about this, even though intellectually I know that the idea that Canada would be hosting a World Cup game in my lifetime is something, and Canada, guaranteed to be in a World Cup again in my lifetime, is something that should be exciting. But it ultimately feels like we're lacking ambition with this. We're taking the sure thing rather than swinging for the fences. And if you don't swing for the fences, you never hit it out.
I don't think we necessarily had a choice, though, because the United States did want to do a bid, and Mexico had ideas of pulling a bid too. So Victor McDaniel, when he became president of CONCACAF last year, he probably saw the writing on the wall. It's like, all right, can Canada really beat the United States in a bid? Equal footing, like the rest of the world to decide is U.S. or Canada better. It's a tough fight. On any given day, it's a tough fight. And if you add Mexico to the equation, it's a tough fight. Who wins out of the 3? And then if you battle each other on the bidding world war, basically, you're not necessarily helping the region, and you kind of dilute the product, and another region might step up and get it again. That's what happened in the past. If you truly want to make the region the focus and make sure that CONCACAF have it, and if you're United States and you have the other 2 nations having that ambition, might as well join yourselves so you don't compete against each other. Everybody's trying to get something out of it, and eventually you have a very strong bid that is tough to beat. I think that's the reasoning behind, not necessarily that Canada's lacking the ambition. It was there before. It's just the reality has set in that, look, can we truly beat the other 2 giants of our region if they want to go to that battle? And I think it's a realization of, you know what, let's be realistic, let's be pragmatic, let's join together to make sure at least the region gets it.
Yeah, look, I think that to answer the question that you just sort of posed there, I do think Canada could potentially win a bid against those three countries, but the two other countries, I should say. But you're right; it wouldn't be a sure thing for sure, and they could easily lose that bid as well. And the other side of that, as you alluded to, is the sort of the idea of vote splitting. That if you have three countries in CONCACAF taking votes off of each other, then it's possible that that an African bid could come up the middle or what have you and take it out of the region. And then if you continue that thought process on, you think it's probably going to be another 8 years before you could realistically try again. Because I do truly think that Uruguay-Argentine bid will probably win the day for the Centennial World Cup. Look, let's move on quickly on this one. We will have lots of time to talk about it as well. I'm hopeful, maybe, I don't know whether the 10-10 split is set in stone or whether there might be some more negotiation on that down the line. We're still many years away from this. You have to see what the stadium situation looks like at the time. You never do know. There could be some tweaks to it down the line that gives Canada and Mexico some more games. But at least for now, I think we just have to assume it's going to be 10-10 and enjoy those 10 games when they come around.
I'm sure there's going to be pressure on the Mexican side and Canadian side to trying to get more. That's going to be negotiation down the road. But at least now the bid project is announced and it's public, and they're going forward with it. Now, Dwayne, before we say goodbye, Champions League quarterfinals today starts. Juventus, Barcelona, Dortmund, Monaco. Tomorrow, Atletico and Leicester, Munich and Madrid. Now, what are your thoughts on today's game? Juventus, Barcelona, Dortmund, Monaco.
Those are two great games. That Dortmund-Monaco game's maybe not as sexy in terms of the names there, and historically speaking, Dortmund's a very strong, historic club for sure. But in terms of the overall levels, Juve and Barca is obviously the one that's going to grab most of the attention. But I actually think, looking at this game, that Dortmund and Monaco might be the better, more entertaining, more aesthetically pleasing game, just because of the styles that those two teams play. So I'm going to have to flip a coin basically when this. Maybe I'll do a split screen today or something, because I think that there's a lot to like about these two games. In terms of tomorrow, Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, that could be a potential final in any other given year. So there's a lot to like there. And, you've got the upset factor, the sort of underdog factor with Leicester and Atleti. Although I think, as I said before, when this draw was made, that Leicester lost the lottery here. That was the worst possible draw for them, because Atleti's just going to grind them. And I think that they actually would have had a better chance against one of the bigger clubs, just because of the styles that they play and the fact that it would have been, let's say Leicester draws Barca, as absurd as this sounds, Barca's going to try and go for the throat, and that would allow Leicester to sort of do what they do.
Oh, Vardy gets away. Oh, our goal. Exactly. I don't think that will happen against Atletico, because Atletico are not going to open up to give any chance to Leicester. They're going to suffocate them. They're going to be compact, and a team managed by Diego Simeone is not going to lose against Leicester. Like, they have the pride factor right there.
Yeah, no, you have to rank these 8 teams so far. They're clear. There's clear who number 8 is in this ranking. Let's just say that. Well, Monaco's played very well,
but their League 4 Monaco is a lot better than what Leicester have shown. And players like Mbappe have been a revelation this year with Monaco, and players like Falcao have a second career boost with their second stint with Monaco.
Yeah, precisely. It's hard to pick a favorite out from these teams. It's a year, and we talked about this in the round of 16, that there's no dominant team within the Champions League format right now. That there's no team that's jumping out. So you could see any one of these. Well, I couldn't see Leicester winning it, but I could see, or Monaco for that matter. But I could see any of the other 6 potentially winning this championship. And don't sleep on Juve. I think that's the team that a lot of people forget about sometimes. They're, what's this, 5 on the trot or 6 on the trot in Serie A. So certainly a team, and they were in the final a couple years ago. So lots to like there. We'll see how this plays out in the end. I'm looking forward to sitting down this afternoon after I get a little writing done in the next little while and get some of my other work done to watch this one. I'm trying to structure my day around that. So maybe on that note, Kevin, we should say goodbye so I can get going.
Exactly. So you can follow Dwayne on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramie. I want to thank our guest today, Tom Marshall of ESPN FC, and Jonathan Tannenwald. You can follow Tom on Twitter at Mexico World Cup and Jonathan at The Goalkeeper. Stay tuned to the Sports Podcast Network. A brand new edition of Scuderia F1 is dropping just mere minutes after this show. And until tomorrow, as always, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.